This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And in this week's episode, we're showing Jonathan a range of different M16s, M4s and other AR-15 style weapons from across a variety of different games.
Whoa, this is a rough one. So this is like someone saw an AR-15 once and then drew it, or modelled it in this case.
If you would like to see Jonathan breaking down more specific weapons like this, make sure to subscribe and let us know what you want to see in the comments section below. Right, over to Jonathan.
So this is saying it's an M4A1. We'll ignore the -S because there's no additional suffix on the military designation for a suppressor. It would just be an M4A1 with a suppressor on it. Whether this is genuinely an A1 or not, I can't tell because the way in which the A1 differs, well, the initial way in which it differed was purely being automatic, not being 3-round burst. Overall, it looks okay. The proportions all look slightly off though. Like the buttstock looks proportionally a bit too small, the magazine housing a bit too big, the carry handle a bit too big. It has an A1 style carry handle and rear sight with an A2 forward assist and case deflector. Now there are A2 uppers that look like that. This isn't one, but it's nearly there, and there are some later on in the series that have that bump on the side. So it's possible to get a weapon, a Colt Carbine in this configuration, but it would de facto not be an M4A1. One thing we do have to give them credit for here is actually including what appears to be the 14.5-inch barrel with the grenade launcher step cut out in the barrel. So many video game M4s are nothing of the sort. Weird quirk of the model that I just happened to have spotted, I never saw this when I was playing the game, is the charging handle appears to be just the thickness of this latch here. So there's the latch that keeps the charging handle from bouncing back and forth, and that's very thin. That's a piece of sheet steel. Hopefully, yeah, there we go. See what I mean? So that sits inside the actual cast T-shaped charging handle, which, as you can see, is a good centimeter or so thick. So it kind of looks a bit weird, and it wouldn't be very robust and doesn't really make much sense. And now as I look at the gun here, trying to look past the skin that's on it, it's too angular. So it looks plausible enough if you're just jumping in to play a game, which of course 99% of people are. If you start looking at it with a firearms eye, it sort of starts to fall apart. But it's definitely trying to be an M4 or an M4A1. This is very strange. So, M4A4. There probably ought to be an M4A4 by this point. The M4 has been through several improvements. The current M4 should probably be M4A4 under the old system. It's not. And this is not it in any case. This is what looks like a Knight's Armament SR-16 or something. That barrel nut ring here, that looks very Knights, as does the quad rail. Otherwise, it's basically just an Mark 18, really. It's more of a Mark 18, more this sort of barrel length. This isn't a Mark 18. We don't have a Mark 18, unfortunately. But a super short barrel, what looks to be a 10 or 10.5-inch barrel with an oddly shaped flash suppressor on it. So it's almost like they've made up what they think an M4A4 ought to be, without reference to what actually was coming into service.
It's been debated since the start of CSGO what's better, the M4A1S or the M4A4, because they replace one another in your loadout options. So you can only take one into a match. But the main difference is like M4A4 has got 10 more rounds, the higher capacity, it's got a higher fire rate. M4A1S benefits from the suppressor. The conversation is so deep that people even say, well, no, the M4A1S is worse because it's longer. So if you're hiding around a corner, there's more chances of someone seeing the suppressor poking it out from around the corner.
Right. So yeah, so I haven't played much at all of Go. I've played a lot of the early variants. The idea of barrel length being a problem in the real world is to do with doorways. It's to do with vehicles, helicopters, that kind of thing, and encumbrance essentially. It's why the buttstocks on these things now tend to telescope or fold if it's not an AR. It's not really a concern whether anyone can see your barrel around the corner, because regardless of length, you're supposed to be a good enough soldier that you don't stick bits of your gun around the corner at all. As far as like changing rates of fire and capacity, I mean, These things are essentially the world standard now for magazines. So you can have any size magazine you want in either of these weapons. So that's purely a gamified thing, as you know. But it's interesting that they forced the players to accept that upgrade, as it were, and live with something they might be less happy with. Now, despite the increasing age of this game, that's looking really pretty good. There's a lot of detail, lots of polygons, and a reasonable number of textures for the era. This is not a game I was able to play at the time, so I'm coming to this pretty fresh. In terms of fidelity to the AR-15, I think this is generically an AR-15. It's not an M16 or an M4 per se. There's a real glaring, what the heck is that feature. So on this upper receiver here, this bump here, this is called the Brunton bump, colloquially. It's an odd looking shape, but it proved quite, well, very effective at getting cartridge cases to hit this and bounce off well away from the shooter. Prior to that, sometimes they could either clout you or the guy immediately next to you. That's not what we have here. Here we have this really bizarre looking squarish oblong thing grafted into the model. I don't know how that's come about or how they've made that mistake, because it ought to look like this. There's that, and then the lower receiver, well, actually the upper as well, technically. So we have a mirrored gun. So what's the right side is depicting the features of the left side. So the other side of the magazine catch, this vertical reinforcement of the magazine well, but they have flipped the upper round the other way so that we're getting case ejection, whatever that was, and this forward assist plunger on the correct side. So it's a really odd mishmash. And we also have, see on the back of this carry handle here, again, wrong carry handle, but same feature. So the real M16 has just a rounded, semi-flat rounded feature here. The gun has a recess. So they have taken time to model a feature in 3D that isn't on the real gun. That's kind of curious. We also have this weird looking worm thing on the side of the receiver that I believe is a cable for a pressure switch for a light. Full credit to them for the graphics of the time for trying to represent that and having it animated. It's visually interesting, but sadly hasn't aged well as a graphical thing. Now this is an AR or an M16 that I have spent a lot of time playing with. Obviously, I wasn't analysing it in detail, but now we're going to. So we don't have an A4 to show you, but we do have this prototype. Well, it's an M16A2 E1. This prototype was for that removable carry handle. So they've literally cut off the carry handle, and then we have a flat top AR, much like the one in the game, but without the Picatinny system. This is more of a Weaver system. So as ever with this collection, we lack some of the obvious stuff sometimes, but we have some really cool, unusual stuff. Just to cover the other side of this, I have an A1 on my lap, as you do, with the same M203 grenade launcher that's in the game. So that'll allow us to do a little bit of comparison. Pretty much a video game trope is grenade launchers generally don't come with a sight, or if they come with a sight, you don't use it. You use an on-screen reticle, as we saw there. Well, our A1 here has the standard 203 sight fitted to the top. If you haven't seen it before, you can just about see. We have range marks there. So there are many stories, certainly from Vietnam with the M79, that grenadiers would be good enough to eyeball their rounds and know where they're going to go without using the sights. So it's not like you can't do this. It's just that you probably ought to be using the sight on the weapon. And it's a little bit of a weird paradox that this era of gaming is known for its ADS, but not for grenades. Right, a little bit of an odd one out this, because Fallout is essentially a fantasy series, but they've chosen to replicate the AR-15 or the M16 here, so I think we need to be a little bit harsh to it. So this is broadly one of these. This is an M16A1. Not the earliest AR, but the first major issue variant that was all fixed after the trouble that was had in Vietnam. So it's an absolute classic. I think it's my favorite AR. And Fallout is pretty much replicating that. What they didn't do, given that it's sort of an alternate future from our 1950s, kind of, they didn't go with the truly retro prototype designs with like charging handle inside the carry handle, or the sort of chunkier AR-10 look or something like that. They went with what was basically a stylized M16, complete with forward assist, which on the game model is an A2 round button, when it should really be this teardrop shape. And there are various other weird liberties taken as well, so that the classic AR has this trigger guard here. This pops out and folds down for Arctic, for winter gloves. Here we have that, but then we have the magazine well protruding further down. So somebody's either not paid attention or just doesn't care, and why should they? So this is an iconic receiver design. So it's easy to get right. Now, what you're all screaming at the screen is, what about the wooden furniture? Yes, there was never any wooden furniture for any AR-15. Certainly not anything, as far as I'm aware, until the 2000s. Correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone did it before that. But as a sort of boutique Gucci thing, there are several people who have lovingly carved, polished, and whatever else wooden furniture for this rifle that was designed around space-age aluminum alloys and space-age polymers. That's absolutely what it was meant to be. It was never meant to have wood on it. Wood is a nightmare for logistics, but it doesn't half look nice. I'm not sure about an AR with wood on it. What do you think? Right, so this is the Carbine version, so they are mirroring the real world here with going back to the XM177 series through to the early prototype M4 with the fixed carry handle. But given that this is, given the sort of parallel timeline here, I guess this is leaning more toward the 1960s variants. That said, for me, it resembles more of an early 80s design. This is the model 733, which is technically an M16A2 series rifle. No, really, it is. Before you get in the comments and say otherwise, I know why you're going to say otherwise, but this is absolutely original from Colt, direct to the Ministry of Defense collection, and it is marked M16A2. So this may be not exactly what Bethesda were going for here, but in terms of configuration, it basically is. So it has it has all the features that this has, just a little bit skew with. What this does let us see are the liberties taken with the design. So the handguard is loosely that round section handguard. Now, that did exist before the 1980s. 1967 is when Colt first designed a round section handguard that has upper and lower halves rather than left and right halves. So it's anachronistic for Fallout's alternate timeline potentially, but it's not as anachronistic as you might think.
Rising Storm 2 Vietnam is a bit more on the realistic end of the spectrum of games today. The magazines are 18 round capacity. They have 18 rounds in them. Wasn't that a common practice to sort of try and prevent jams? So they've leaned into the reliability element a little bit.
I don't know how common that was in the conflict, actually in that conflict. Over time, that definitely has been a practice to download by a couple of rounds to try to increase reliability, and even some tier 1 operators today will do that deliberately. Others don't think it's necessary. Given that it's in the game and there's no real gameplay difference between 18 rounds and 20, I'm pretty sure they've based that on something from real history.
So was it the M16 that had the issues and they were addressed in the A1 in terms of stoppages or reliability?
So this story is bound up in the really weird history of the M16 as a sort of a backdoor program. So it was actually the US Air Force, apart from Special Operations Forces advisors who received quantities early on. The only reason the M16 happened was the US Air Force really wanted it. And then corners were cut with the type of propellant that was used, and there were other teething issues. So the M16, as it was introduced, that then came into use with the US Army as well, was not ideal. And with the US Army using it, obviously that's the main bulk of the force that's fighting on the ground. And so these problems come to light. And they're solved pretty quickly by creating initially the M16E1, and that's standardized early in 1967 as the M16A1. So even in late 66, you've got M16E1s in service that are already fixed, and then everyone's got them sort of mid 67 pretty much. And so the reputation improves drastically from there. But there's enough has gone wrong in crisis situations on the ground that some guys never trusted the M16 or the AR-15. As to the actual game, I think this is really faithful, except maybe for the lack of sling. We should see a sling on the M16. Broadly speaking, infantry rifles should always be fitted with their sling. This is looking absolutely spot on to this. I'm literally holding this alongside the video game version, and the only minor details that don't look right, but the sling is the biggie for me.
So obviously we know it's not actually an M16. I think they call it an AR-16 in the game. It's very much its own thing, but you can see what gun it's trying to be, I guess.
Well, there is an AR-16. So just to remind those, or tell those of you who don't know, AR stands for Armalite. Not for Armalite rifle or for assault rifle, certainly not for that, or automatic rifle. So there are lots of different firearms, not just rifles, with an AR prefix that the Armalite company produced, or designed at least. AR-16 is not whatever this is. AR-16 was the 7.62 by NATO version of the AR-18, because it actually came first. These guys didn't know that, and so they've gone, well, we want to design an AR-15, but we want to change the name for either legal reasons or just because we want to, and because we're going to change the design, so we're going to call it the AR-16. One better than AR-15. Well, there already was one. It was only a prototype. It was never put into production. So that's the real AR-16. Let's see what this thing is. Whoa, this is a rough one. So this is like someone saw an AR-15 once and then drew it, or modeled it in this case. So they have been extremely fast and loose with this design. To be fair, they're effectively creating their own fictional rifle for this fictional video game that we're looking at. But it's so reminiscent of an AR that people who aren't into this stuff like I am would assume that it is in fact one. That's fine, but I would criticize it on the basis that there are features there that are cribbed from the AR without any understanding of what they are or what they do. So notably, the T-shaped charging handle of the AR is present, sort of, but it's this weird sheet metal gutter that's been folded and like riveted onto the back of the gun. I guess you could make a charging handle that looked like that. The forward assist, it's like a round A2 variant, and it's on the wrong side, and the housing is too narrow. I think if you drop that rifle on that housing, it would probably crack the forging. So from an engineering point of view, this thing is all over the place. Okay, this is actually a better M4 than our M4, as I've said more than once. This is a quote-unquote English M4A1, really, because it's automatic, but it has an A1 flash suppressor, all the wrong markings, the wrong finish. Weirdly, it even has a chromed bolt carrier that the early AR-15s had, but the US GI ones didn't. So it's the closest thing we currently have to an M4A1. So this, the thing I'm looking at, is a better one than this, which is a little bit galling for me. Or I have to really squint at this to find issue with it. They've even got the right oval section round handguards on this thing. So I can't say I'm surprised to learn that this is Tarkov. We've covered the game, of course, more than once before. They are very, very good at various aspects of guns in games, and the modeling and texturing of them is only one of them. Now, something I think I picked up on Tarkov before, the recoil on this thing is ridiculous. If I can shoot it without it going without muzzle rise, anybody can. It should not be rising that much. This design, inline stock, pulling it in, it cannot push you back enough to induce that level of muzzle rise. And what's weird is it seems to rise in place as well. Like the butt plate is slipping down your shoulder, which is basically impossible. You'd have to be holding it off your shoulder, and then it might do that. Maybe. Now, this is not as high def, as it were, or as faithful as the Tarkov M4, but it is showing something that I didn't pick up on the others that is a real feature, which is those ruler type markings on the bottom of the rear sight. Those are the adjustment or datum points, as it were, reference points for the wheel on the side, where you turn the wheel and you adjust your windage, your left and right sight adjustment. So that many clicks has taken my rear sight wildly out of alignment, and it's probably making some shooters twitch. Little details that really don't matter when it comes to video gaming, unless you're going, I guess, real hardcore milsim, where you want it to be interactive with your sights. And then the wheel below that, you can see, is represented as well. So on earlier games, it's just a texture. And this is the system of sighting brought in with the M16A2 in 1983-ish, allowing M1 Garand level adjustment of sights, which prior to that, the US Army, well, even then, the US Army did not want. It was the US Marines that were pushing for that. Oh, hang on, hold the phone. On the first view, this looked like M4 with some dress-up parts on it, like the Tomorrow War with its Hero Arms furniture and some optics and stuff that make it look like it's from the future. But actually, this is quite different. We've got some weird stuff going on at the back here, where there's a sort of bolt reciprocating that's open to the air, and I don't understand what's happening. This is blowing my tiny mind because it has a lot of M4 or AR-15 detail, like the castle nut here that holds the buffer tube to the upper receiver, sorry, to the lower receiver. Lots and lots of bits of AR are in this, but then mechanically they've completely changed how the gun works, and I don't think it's plausible. Correction, I know it's not plausible. This is interfering with how the upper and lower fit together even, but even regardless of that, there's a bolt or bolt carrier or whatever it's supposed to be positioned all the way back here and then reciprocating. So it's doing its reciprocating where the rounds aren't. So it's not able to feed any rounds into the chamber. The chamber, based on where that bolt face is, or the face of the bolt carrier, would have to be back here, meaning that the barrel comes all the way back into the receiver, which just completely breaks the design. There's also a weird pipe tube thing coming out of the upper receiver here and forward into the handguard that almost looks like it's powering the laser on the side, but why would it need to be grafted into the receiver right where the it doesn't make sense. This one is confusing me quite a bit. I'd go so far as to say this is a cursed gun. There's something not quite right about this. It's pretty good, almost very good, but it looks like they've tried to represent the Law Tactical folding buttstock or something similar to it. It should just have the castle nuts and the lower receiver and the buffer tube, because this is a vanilla AR otherwise, but it has some weird seam and a latch, and it looks like it's meant to fold. Overall, this is a pretty heat movie gun, clearly one of the main inspirations for the Payday series. The guns in that, though, so those are Colt M733s, which is this sucker here. This is the original M733 and probably the most common variant. Something to look out for if you're really bored is, and you can only see it from like Gunsmith View or whatever, the original airsoft ARs, M16s, M4s, whatever, were electrically powered. So to fit in the battery, all the gubbins that goes in there, the lower receiver of the real AR, which is very svelte, had to be widened. And so the whole gun, actually, because it mates to the upper receiver, the whole gun was wider than it ought to have been on those electric airsoft replicas. And hopefully you can see on this 733 here how narrow the front of the mag well, or the lower, is. And the Payday gun is too wide, I believe. Feel free to argue about that, but which would make sense if they are copying an airsoft gun, because with the fidelity of airsoft guns, typically that's not a problem. Unless you really need to get in and model the details of the working parts, you're fine. It's almost a bit embarrassing to think how good I thought the graphics on this game were in 1997. But hey, it was 1997. 3D weapon models were a new thing. Looking at it now, especially after a string of much better representations of AR-15s, it's not great. I need to be charitable here. That upper receiver is not that forged, very slim, semi-cylindrical shape of the AR. It's the other AR, the AR-18 or the 180. It's a box section, pressed steel looking body with a carry handle kind of just floating on the top there that makes it look more like an M16. So it's so square and blocky, given what they've done with the handguard, which is not quite round, but it's it's more round. Being charitable, this could have been meant to be a mishmash. But it still screams AR because of that ribbed round handguard, that tall front sight post. And the other weird thing on this, which I think we commented on before, is the buttstock. The AR must have an inline buttstock. Great for recoil control, but it's there because the bolt carrier has to come out of the back of the gun partway, and then you need space for the spring. So it has to have that inline design. And here we have a dropped buttstock. And I think I speculated at the time that was to do with the model looking right in front of your virtual eyeball, so that you didn't have a stock clipping through the bottom of the screen. Easily the worst of the bunch, but holds a very special place in my heart because I've always loved GoldenEye, and I really like AR-15s, so I have to give it a bit of a pass. Okay, well that was an AR-15 fest. Easily the best has to be Tarkov. I think they're kind of known for their model fidelity at this point. And sadly, objectively the worst is of course GoldenEye N64, but we still love it. As ever, please do check out our Royal Armouries website, brand new website. Links to our social media channels and how to donate and things if you'd like to do that there. And come and visit us. We've got an exciting new display coming toward the end of the year with some pretty cool shiny guns in it. So please do check out the Royal Armouries side of things, and we'll see you here next week.